Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Everlast Adventures podcast, episode number 4. So today we're going to be covering sessions 6 and 7. Wow, 6 and 7 already. I can't believe it.
6 and 7.
Yeah, but as always, we are joined by the creator and Fate Weaver here at Fantasy Forge Studios, creator of Everlast, Kyle LaFont. So welcome, Kyle.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? I'm happy to be here and talk about a couple really fun sessions of Everlast.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like not a lot happened as far as like progression goes in these last 2 sessions, but a lot happened. Like a ton happened. And we introduced some new systems to the game, like including like a new battle system and some really cool, fun role play moments, which were really nice. So we'll get into talking about all of those. But before we get into it, let's talk about this podcast. So what exactly is this podcast, Kyle? Why do we do this podcast every month after each of our monthly sessions?
Absolutely. So this podcast serves primarily for our listeners, especially those who don't know what Everlast is, whether you're listening to this after the release of the game or listening to it now currently before the release of the game, for you guys to kind of know what's going on as far as like game mechanics, process behind it, but also to just explain the story a little bit further, whether it's bringing on people for like guests that are players from previous episodes, whatnot. But primarily, like, we don't want to bog down the actual adventures of Everlast, of Eklos Eos, with gameplay, like mechanics and stuff like that. This is really going to be the place that a lot of those things are going to be discussed. And especially in these early stages of, well, later early stages of the creation of this game, where we're trying new things out, we're implementing new things. Like, it's our way to be able to talk through them and help introduce you to them, just to kind of figure out like what's actually going on and like how, like, you know, battle combat changed from one session to another.
Yeah, exactly. And as we mentioned, so the contents of this podcast vary a wide variety. So for example, we do like to stay within the sessions that we did previously during the month, but we also do, as Kyle mentioned, talk about the different new mechanics, because yes, this is a tabletop RPG, but it's completely different than like Pathfinder or Dungeons and Dragons. It has some similar elements, but for the most part it's its own game, obviously. And so like I feel like this is the place to be able to talk about it. And as always, we do upload this to YouTube. We do have a website as well, fantasyforgestudios.com, so you can feel free to do that. That will be always uploaded. Our most recent video gets uploaded in the recent contents tab, so feel free to go on over there to be able to do it, and the link will be in the about section down below here, so that's no problem there. You can go and visit there, but also YouTube, of course. So this will be up on YouTube, one of our few non-Twitch streamed content. So again, YouTube and our website are the only places that you'll be able to see this podcast. And I guess without further ado, Kyle, again, the most boring but very important part of this podcast, let's get into the disclaimers and the reminders of everything.
Absolutely. And so this game, Everlast, everything that you see, whether it's music, whether it's the visuals, art, everything that you see, it's all the property of Fantasy Forge Studios and Kyle LaFont. It's all protected under copyright law of the United States. And so don't take it, don't use it and sell it as yourself, as your own creation. This project has taken years of our lives to be able to even get to this point. And so it really is important to us. It's a baby to us. That being said, please feel free to use it for your own homebrew stuff, whether you have D&D campaigns, whether you want to reach out and like figure out maybe some mechanics about Everlast, and I can help lead you in the right direction, whatever the case. Feel free to use that in your homebrew stuff, just for your own fun and enjoyment. This is essentially a project for you guys to be able to have fun with and adventure in this beautiful world of Everlast.
Yeah, exactly. And so now the reminders are out of the way, introduced ourselves, introduced the podcast topic. Let's dive right into it. So we're going to be diving right into session 6. So probably the most action-packed session we've had so far. Again, it was pretty much just a long battle, which is really cool. So I guess the first thing we'll talk about, since again, it was a long battle. Actually, you know what? We'll talk about the battle in a second. There was one instance in which the player character Luxalia started the battle, And I guess the thing we need to talk about a little bit is playing true to your character. So I know all of us were just like, oh, what did you do to us, Luxalia? But Luxalia was only playing true to her character. So Kyle, what exactly happened? I guess we can go into a little bit of an explanation about Session 6 and the bring up to how we got into this massive battle. So let's go into that a little bit before we start talking about Luxalia.
So for those of you who have not watched sessions 6 or 7, I would definitely redirect you there before really listening to this podcast, mostly because why would you want to miss the action-packed fun of a crazy combat? Multiple things as they're trying to survive this dungeon. But second of all, as far as this session 6 was concerned, this was technically the group's second session inside the Jungle Keep.
Yes.
And they had been walking around being introduced to types of things. They had already been introduced to Krothos and were looking around the dungeon itself. Eventually, they did end up meeting Sinzirak, who basically the direct apostle of I guess not the apostle, more like the apprentice of the sorcerer, Emios. And basically was asking Eklos Eos, as disguised as bandits, that's important, to basically pledge allegiance to Lord Lilothy, this great being, demonic being, and also the sorcerer and his work in order to be there. And to be honest with you, I knew that there was going to be some conflict. One of the things with Luxalia and the way that she plays is she's someone who's always striving for goodness and always striving towards the light. And I knew that this was going to challenge her.
Yep. I think we all did deep down a little bit.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it was funny because seeing just the way, we only had Max, Cole, and Dane for this session. And with Max and Dane, I knew that they were going to be all right, whatever we can do to just keep up the appearances. Cole with Luxalia was the one who I was very apprehensive about. And actually, one of the things that was mentioned earlier is when they first encountered Sinzirak going back into the little chapel room, I purposely guarded her with, I believe it was 12 cultists, basically the equivalent of 4 cultist troops. And there were already a couple cultist troops within the room and all that kind of stuff. There were also the couple bandits that were escorting them. And so I was really trying to make the decision difficult because one, I knew Luxalia, if she felt they can completely take down whatever was oppressing them, it would have been a no-brainer. Eklos Eos, we saw them completely butcher previously, a horde of bandits, essentially, with very little issue. And with
speak
this
for yourself, Yuki, literally in every single battle that we've had so far, has been feeling it hard, but that's because she's also very much a frontliner.
That's true. And with this one, taken into account that the only one who's actually wearing armor was Zil.
Yeah.
And so pretty much every attack that was going to be thrown at them were going to hit, which somehow wasn't necessarily the case. I was rolling a lot of natural ones, and pretty much for the group, natural ones were the only way that they weren't getting hit. Yep. So I was rolling quite a few of those. And actually, you'll notice that it was frustrating me a little bit, just being I wanted this to be a difficult combat for you, or at least a somewhat challenging combat for the party.
Well, there's a mechanic later on towards the end of the battle that I think definitely made it more challenging than we initially thought it was going to be. But we'll talk about that a little bit later on.
Yeah. But essentially, I put a bunch of bodies in this room, which when this actual supplement eventually does come out for Everlast, there's not going to be that many bodies. And but I just knew Eklos Eos is way overpowered. Technically speaking, this is supposed to be level 1, level 2 dungeon.
Yeah.
And so I've taken this dungeon and converted it to the Eklos Eos level 7 level, which with essentially what's in there, it's very difficult to do with simple cultists and bandits.
Yeah.
That's just the way that it is. And so bandit troops and cultist troops are the way to do that. And with Luxalia, I was like, oh, maybe this is going to be enough to keep her, which I think, got
Initially
her
it
to
did,
think
I think.
about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, initially it did, because I mean, it was the second time that we had entered this like chapel, this desecrated chapel. The first time was when we were initially getting our induction into the bandit camp, and I actually thought that was when things were gonna hit the fan. At least as being a player character during it, Yuki was ready. Like, she was really, really ready. And I would say it wasn't until the second time where we went in there and since Zirak actually made us pledge the allegiance, I think Yuki, and again, like, Yuki and Zil were ready to go along with it. And going into like playing your character true to how it was, I mean, personally, if I was in the situation, I probably would have done exactly what Luxalia did. I wouldn't have had the conscience to submit myself and swear to an evil being, but Yuki isn't necessarily that kind of character. I think she had the long goal in mind, and I think Zil, again, still being very ignorant of the world and things of Everlast, didn't really maybe consider what he would be agreeing to, if that makes sense. But Luxalia, yeah, no, she wasn't having it at all.
Well, in the way that Zil too, like, I really love how Max plays Zil, partially because one of the things that is really interesting is actually his patronage is not a patronage that will be in the initial release of the game. It's one that actually is going to be quite a bit down the line. So just kind of sneak peek into that. And part of that patronage is the ability to, he basically sheds a heroic aura to some degree, like an aura of light. Kind of, I think back to like Final Fantasy and like the Warrior of Light, which is like the original Final Fantasy like one character. I know in like Final Fantasy 14, like all of the player characters are like Warriors of Light, kind of stuff. But like essentially, like he has this essence to him that he doesn't understand yet, because especially the way the patronages are supposed to work is characters don't necessarily know that they're chosen. They understand, and like through character progression and all that kind of stuff, they come to know their true purpose as adventurers and eventually just heroes of Everlast. But Zil, being this orphan from the city of Helix, just felt like honestly he had just been thrown into this group, and he's been chosen. However, he doesn't quite understand like what's going on with like himself. Like he's learning to like be able to read void speech. He's like he's like learning all kinds of things. He's just like, I have no idea how this is going. And I really appreciate how Max is playing that. So like Max is, I feel like there's like a lot of like good confusion in there, but because of that, like he's hesitant to be able to make decisions for the whole party on a party level, because he's still dealing with himself. Where again, with Yuki, with Dane and Yuki, I feel like one of the things that Yuki is really, I think her role in the party, and correct me if I'm wrong, is she's just trying to keep the glue together. She's the glue that keeps the party together from outbursts. Because again, you have the one side of Luxalia, and then you have the other side of Belvin. Where like, because Yuki has like really good charisma, is really good with like the speaking and talking, like she can keep any like conversation from devolving into just chaos.
And I mean, basically making out of every situation with as little cuts as possible. And maybe moving from session 8 on, maybe we're gonna have to rely on that a little bit more. But definitely all caution was thrown into the wind with Luxalia. But actually, speaking of Zil's class, we did add a new feature to the Twitch stream this past time, and basically it's a command that you can do. You can do !Everlast. Those of you who follow on the Twitch, this is useful information for you. But you can do !Everlast, and then there's a bunch of commands with all the characters, and we'll keep it continuously updated. But basically, if you're new to Everlast, or say you happen to join us for a specific thing, instead of like being able to like having to ask us while we're currently streaming about each character and their stats and their stat progression, we have a continuously moving stat progression that goes through. But you can do ! And then each of the characters' names, and basically it gives you pretty much all the basic information about them. It gives them like the name, the level, the class, that kind of stuff, as well as stats, and then a brief little description about like the character itself and what they hold true and like their motives for things so people can get to know the characters a little bit more. But actually, Zill is the only one that has first patronage question marks. Question mark, question mark, question mark. Everyone else has actually the things about it. So I don't know if you noticed that, Kyle, but I actually did.
I did not actually.
I did that on purpose because it's not released yet. So
I appreciate
you're
that.
welcome.
No, that's really good. Here's the thing. I'm sure at some point it's going to be mentioned by Max or it's going to be mentioned by somebody because all the players have access to each other's stat blocks and character sheets and all that kind of stuff. For like missing people and like that kind of stuff.
We'll get to that a little bit later on today for sure.
Yeah. But going back to session 6 as far as like playing true to your character, like I did not know how Luxalia was actually going to handle the situation. I mean, it's actually funny. There's a lot of preparation that goes into each session. I don't know if you guys realize it, but I mean, I think any DM that does like D&D sessions that like run their own campaigns that are completely homebrew can kind of relate to it, where it's just like there's so much that you have to put in. It really is feeling like a full-time job, like getting a session ready, especially playing twice a month. It can be really tough, especially back to back, figuring out everything and getting stuff down and, you know, nailing down mechanics. If things didn't work from one session, how can I maybe like tweak them or change them to make it to where, you know, the life is easier for adventurers so they don't have as much to keep track of, so they don't have to worry about, you know, like, oh my gosh, just the sheer amount of stuff, and that detracts from the fun of the game.
I think so too,
but on top of that, you also have a story where, like, for example, like eventually I want to run here on this channel Adventures in Middle Earth with players. So lots of you guys, I would love to be able to get in contact with you and maybe set up a group for Adventures in Middle Earth, where that's already like pre-written content that, you know, week to week I don't have to worry about putting quite as much work in. But with Luxalia in this specific encounter, I honestly did not have an encounter set up for the situation, and which is part of the reason why I threw in all the bodies that I did and all the bodies I could that like physically could squish into that room. If you look at the battle map, it's just like ridiculous. It's chaotic. But I was just like, all right, we'll just see what we can do. And lo and behold, combat began. I mean, granted, yes, Luxalia didn't like physically attack, but throwing those shields on everybody, those light shields, like, yeah, that's going to be enough for Sinzirak to instigate attacks.
She was already suspicious. Again, speaking of Zill, like, she would constantly elude, not only because Max was rolling really, really poor as far as like the what was it, the checks that he was having to make for her influence over him and stuff. He was rolling really poor, and she was quickly seeing through it. So I was actually a little bit nervous with Zill too, because she kept mentioning,
and actually a little bit with Luxalia in that session too. Like there was one check, I believe it was an influence check maybe, that Luxalia like completely flopped, and Sinzirak, like, it got to the point where like the party was able to play it off a little bit. But it's kind of like what led everybody into the room. It's like, all right, if you're really serious about this, let's lay it all the cards on the table. This is what you're here for, and you're gonna do it. And if not, clearly we saw what happened. And so one of the things too that's also quite important as far as this is concerned, and you know, this is the first time that Eklas has ever played actually like Everlast Dungeon. At least for like the current rules and the way that everything is set up. And one of the things that I wanted the players to, you know, kind of find out for themselves is, all right, yes, Eklas is a really strong level 7 party that's probably fighting maybe like a level 5-ish party threat level. At least that first encounter was, it would have been like a tough encounter for like a level 5 party. One of the things is this is just the beginning of a dungeon where there's potentially quite a few combat encounters that they still have to go, and they have limited resources such as the arts that they can use, such as their HP. They can't rest during these periods, and so like they're very limited on their resource, such as items and that kind of stuff that they can actually physically use to survive this dungeon. And unlike some dungeons, which will be introduced later, where you can just abandon the dungeon, there's no abandoning this one. The gates are closed. They're stuck inside this keep. They're either making it through it or they're going to die trying. Sorry, Dane. That's the dealio.
Kind of figured though. Like honestly, with
Yeah.
that pit of despair, you ain't getting out of there without falling into that pit of despair.
Exactly, or leaving there victorious. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the thing, like especially with this session, like one of the ways that maybe you could play this dungeon if you're adventuring through this with like a level 1 party is like seeing like just a patrol of like 3 or 4 just regular bandits could prove deadly for a party, and if not deadly, like you still have to complete the rest of the dungeon with that with limited resources. Is being able to look through each of the rooms, where maybe that's not quite as important for Eklos Eos, like uncovering all the secrets of this keep, but maybe like a level 1 or level 2 party wants to do that to try to find things like health items, to try to find things that help recover arts, that kind of stuff. But one way, I mean, they're trying to get Duluth into this keep as well, and I think the primary reason is not just to break him in, but to be able to rally allies via Duluth against a great threat as the sorcerer.
Yep.
And so, that's another way to be able to go through it. And so, just as far as like the dungeon is concerned, there's a lot of ways to play it. I mean, Eklos Eos is playing relatively true to what Eklos Eos fashion is, where it's like they're a pretty big but strong party that can take things down. But again, like you look at like the amount of like arts and stuff, especially arts that they use during those encounters, and maybe it just like helps them to realize like, crap, like I don't know how much longer is left in this dungeon. I have to really be careful about the stuff that I use, about like how much of my abilities and whatnot that I can actually spend on just a combat encounter against cultists.
It reminds me a lot of like, say when you're playing a game like Pokemon, or you're going through like an Elite Four or like Victory Road type situation, where yes, you may have Pokemon that are like a million times over leveled than the opponents that you're constantly fighting, but if you're constantly fighting them, you're constantly getting whittled down as far as
you're running
Pokemon.
out of PP, you're running out of health potions, like all that kind of stuff.
So it is a grind for sure. And so even if that first session, even though it was a whole freaking session, seemed like a long time, and maybe it seemed easy when in reality, like we were pretty much hitting everyone with every hit except for Zil, because he couldn't hit War if he fell off a boat that session when it came to using his axe. But may have seemed easy, but it actually kind of, at least Yuki, it kind of ran her dry a little bit as far as the things that she had. Like she only attacked for 3 turns, but she was going all out. And so now it really makes me think of like, wow, I have to reconsider battle from here on out. So for sure.
Well, and also too, like something that again, the encounter itself might have seemed relatively easy, but Eklos Eos was passing checks that were really good to pass. Like the cultists themselves, Sinzirak, as well, had all kinds of shenanigans that they could pull to disable potentially, lethal, groups.
Can you give us a little flavor text of something that could have happened? For example, I know Sinzirak had this one spell. I don't know if you want to spoil that one or if you want to use the cultist ones that they had, but none of them landed. But
none of them landed.
What were they? What
that's frustrating to me. So Sinzirak had her attack, her basically Shadow Spear attack, which did pretty much guaranteed damage. So I tried to do that whenever I could, especially on Zil. I tried to make it where like she was also attacking Lusalia. I felt like that made a lot of sense. Just kind of like getting rid of the like light in the room per se. But there was actually a spell that she had called Enfeeble. So Enfeeble, what that does is if the person fails their check, they gain a -4 to their mind survival check.
Oh no!
And so what it does is if you enfeeble somebody, and basically it lasts until, I think it's like a 1-minute timer, but essentially what it does is if you enfeeble someone and you do that, it makes the rest of the cultist stuff have a higher chance of landing on you.
Oh, God,
and so awful. Like it pretty much, like if she hits you with that, like it cripples you against everything else into the room. Which is not good, because other things like fear start to come into play, which in Everlast, unlike D&D, I'm pretty sure like in D&D you just can't like run up and attack someone. You have to pretty much be running away the whole time. Where in Everlast, one of the ways that fear works is during the movement phase, you have to make combat challenges unless you're making ranged weapon attacks. But if you attempt a combat challenge, if you are frightened of a creature, you basically have to make a skill check. If you end up failing, then you are, basically completely frightened. But what ends up happening is your movement phase ends. So if you attempt, like, you could try to be smart and it's like, okay, this is the last thing that I can do on my turn. I'm gonna just try to do it. Regardless, if you fail it, your movement phase ends, which brings a lot of opportunity for other creatures that either haven't acted yet to be able to swarm and surround a player, that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, it could be like fear is a really sketchy thing to be able to work with, and cultists work on that a lot. But they also have like a lot of like influencing things, taking damage. They have some things that actually allow players to gain points of misery. And for those of you who don't know, like if you fall into vice, which is basically like the alignment system in this game, but it's like a flexible alignment. There's like virtue, neutral, and vice. And you have points of misery equal to your faith, a score, that kind of stuff. And if you fall into vice, you get negative effects. If you go into virtue, you get positive effects. But they help you gain points of misery. And it's like misery is not super easy to get rid of, but it can accumulate like faster than you know. And it's supposed to kind of reflect, you're in a horrible situation, and it's like, how is your spirit, how is your soul interacting with the environment, with the things that you're witnessing, the encounters around you. I mean, they're all mortal creatures that, have free will and that kind of stuff. And the more, horrible things that you see, the more they're going to be affected by it.
Oh, for sure. Well, I guess that's a pretty good description of what got us into the battle and like what actually ensued in the battle. But since we actually started talking about the battle, so we implemented the new battle like phase for the game Everlast. So it's not like D&D, it's not like that kind of stuff. It's completely brand new. And so I guess, Kyle, if you want to give us a simple breakdown of the battle system and like the different phases. We don't need to go into like too much. I'm sure the more people watch, the more they'll get used to it, but just like the basic breakdown of like how battles in Everlast happen.
Absolutely. So essentially a battle is split into 4 different phases. So and then once all 4 of those phases are complete, that's one round of combat. You always have the top of the round. So essentially what ends up happening at the top is you roll first for your priority initiative. And what that is basically based on the creature's dex scores, so dexterity scores, and other modifiers that happen, is every single turn, and this is a big difference from D&D, Pathfinder, that kind of stuff. Every single turn, you re-roll initiative. It's actually more reminiscent to like a war game, like Middle-earth strategy battle game, Warhammer, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Where every single turn you roll priority initiative, and then once that's all set up, that's the order that you act in the next 2 phases of the game: the movement and the attack phase. But before going into any of those phases, the last thing that you do at the top of the round is a roll for enmity. So the enmity system in the game is basically how influential you are on the map, but also how you're able to effectively like not only taunt things, but like disengage from things as well. And so I was trying to work with an enmity system previously where it's like, maybe we want attackers to have like less enmity, or maybe you want like supporters to have like less enmity, and have like our tank characters have all kinds of enmity and that kind of stuff. And it made it kind of difficult as far as stat layouts, because I noticed that a lot of the guys were like, well, I want to kind of like change around my stats, and like if that's the case, like I don't necessarily want influence on my stat or like that kind of stuff. And so essentially I tweaked it to where every player, doesn't matter who they are, want enmity. And essentially what that is it's a straight D16 roll. And whatever you get is your enmity for the turn. So it ranges from -3 all the way to +3. Defenders, they have certain characteristics with them that allow them to add things like their influence modifier. So again, it makes them more of a tank presence. And Zill also has another trait that's on him that just allows him to add just a base +2. So you'll notice that he'll get higher enmity rolls just by virtue of that.
I think Solid is getting like -2s and -1s and 3s and like -3s and stuff. pretty much.
Yeah, so it doesn't really have actually much to do as effect on like their stats. It's pretty much just like a straight roll, and whatever happens happens. And again, that was part of going back to, it's like before I had them having to keep track of all things, like how much damage they were inflicting, how much damage they were taking, how many different enemies they attacked. It was too much. It got to the point where it just wasn't, battle wasn't smooth. People weren't actually like focused on what was happening in battle. They were just focused on like, oh my gosh, I have to keep track of all these stats. Not as fun. And so simplifying it down, again, some of these things could be subject to change, but I don't know about you, Dane, I felt like it went okay.
It went really well. Well, I also think just the people who are there, again, although Cole had to leave early because he had to be somewhere, but so it was pretty much the entire battle just Max and I just playing everyone's characters. But it felt very smooth, and even though it was our first time doing like the battle system, like I think having it split into the 4 different segments makes it really easy to keep track of, because it's like, okay, we're in this section, what do I need to do in this section? Okay,
so yeah, these are the things that I can do here, as opposed to like in a D&D round, it's like I have to do all of my stuff in this one round.
Yeah, exactly. So it makes it a little bit easier, a little bit more manageable. So after the first phase, as far as like getting Enmity and stuff goes, what's next? What's phase 2?
Next, you jump into what is called the movement phase, which this includes a few different things, but the primary things is movement. So whether it's walking speed, people can move up to their maximum walking speed, and this is the only time that they're allowed to do so. During the attack phase, they are not. So you can only move your maximum. And actually, I remember talking to Connor, and he was saying he was actually really confused about that when he was listening back, because he wasn't there for the session. And I explained it a little bit to him, where it's just like, kind of makes sense with the way that combat challenges and stuff that are made, and we'll go into that later too. But you have to move your maximum distance. Other things that you can do is you can only use support actions, just base support actions during this phase. So whether that's something like using an item from your adventures pouch, whether that is using a support art, like healing, that kind of stuff, trying to blind someone, trying to like inflict a status ailment on someone, trying to buff your party in whatever way. A lot of those types of support actions that a creature can use could be like some effect that you grant on a player or yourself that lasts until the end of the combat round. So basically carries through the rest of the movement phase into the attack phase, and then into the bottom of the round.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, like especially when you're playing just like video games in general, or just when you watch like a fantasy type movie or TV show. The first thing everyone does is buff themselves before they go into battle. So it makes complete sense that the support actions are used right away
before the attacks,
because that makes plenty of sense. Like that's what you do. Like when you're going into like a mob boss or something in an MMORPG or something like that, what do you do first? You give each other bunches of durability buffs and stuff like that, and like a DPS, that's when they pop all their skills to like for like attack up, that kind of stuff. So it makes plenty of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also there's such things as turn actions. So again, things like bide, which if you run out of stamina, that's your way to be able to recover stamina. You have things like rescuing. So if you have a party member that has fallen unconscious, you can attempt to help rescue them and bring them back to consciousness. Things like that, like switching out items. So if you have weapons on your person, if you have weapons or items in your adventures pouch, and you want to switch them out with stuff that's in your inventory, like your stored backpack, you can spend a turn action to do that.
Or in Yuki's case, changing into armor.
Changing into armor.
2 turns.
Exactly. I think it was 3 turns.
It was 2 turns. So for
2 turns.
Yeah, for her it's 2 turns. Yeah. She has ability to be able to do so, but
yeah. But the thing that is really interesting about that is, well, not necessarily interesting, but the way that works is if you're using a turn action, you have to declare it at the very beginning of your turn in the movement phase. You can't like move and then be like, hey, I'm gonna do a turn action. It's like, nope, you got to declare it. So like, yeah, turn actions are a thing. And then the last thing, well, one of the last things that you can do is you can actually make attack actions if you have ranged attacks. So such as like ranged attack arts. So anything that does have a range, like in the wording of everything, it's very specific. It's like this ranged attack, or like ranged weapon attack, ranged attack art. Basically, you can use that. And so the way that I kind of justify that is it's very difficult to shoot into combat.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest reasons for that is I don't think it's normal in war for especially members of like a good side, which the adventuring party is supposed to be, to fire into combats where they have the potential of hitting their basically hitting their allies. And so the shooting phase actually takes place, preferably if you have a high dexterity or a high, initiative, takes place before combat challenges are actually made. And what that does is allows you to get quick damage off. It allows those ranged DPS to do their DPS thing without having to like be in melee combat. And it kind of gives you some freedom. And it honestly, one of the things that I throughout even like the 2 years that we were playing Everlast as a D&D session that like I really struggled with is I had all this really cool terrain. I had all this like I use Dwarven Forge. It's freaking amazing. It's so much fun. All this really cool terrain, but the players weren't using it. Basically, they just like threw their bodies into characters and just did like into enemies, and that was it. There was no like maneuverability. There was no strategy involved in like where you're positioned and that kind of stuff. Where having the ranged attack actions before the like physical combat or melee combat, I think allows for people who are trying to do damage from afar, be able to actually get into positions where it's important to be able to, actually make clear shots at things.
For sure. Oh yeah. Or it also handicaps you, for example, if you're in a tight little chapel room like we were, it's going to be really hard to make a bow attack point blank because everyone's on top of each other.
Hence the reason Thordain pulled out his sword.
Yeah, the Gladys.
Well, and also too, I mean, there's rules. For example, we'll get into this in the next phase, but there's rules that like prevent you. You want space around you to be able to maneuver. You don't want to necessarily be fighting back to back to back. However, you can kind of create an almost shield wall per se by doing that, kind of a defensive stance, that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's interesting the way that you can kind of maneuver, creatures around to be able to do that. Hence, I felt like the movement phase kind of needed its own thing. And then one of the last things that you could do during that phase is initiate a combat challenge. So essentially, in order to do that, what you have to do is you have to not only be able to move enough to be able to be in base contact with another creature, a melee, so melee is within 5 feet attack, within base contact of another creature, but you also have to be able to, actually technically you don't necessarily need to have any attack actions left. You could spend all of your ranged attacks and then go into a combat encounter. But again, that's where maneuverability is good. So if you realize there's like this corridor that's like, if I go into base contact with this creature and make a combat challenge, they're going to clog up the rest of the area so people, like reinforcements, can't come through. Like there's a small corridor and there's like this big monster in the corridor. But there's lots of bandits or like lots of cultists behind it that can't get through because a combat challenge has been made and you can't move past that. Like it gives, again, more maneuverability. The movement has become essentially more important. A lot more strategy involved. But with that, you make a combat challenge, and you can make a combat challenge against every creature that you're in base contact with. And so you want to be able, not just yourselves be able, if you want to play defensive style, make it so where, you're minimizing the amount of creatures that can base contact you and actually instigate combat. But you look for openings in the enemy's defenses where maybe you can challenge as many creatures potentially as you want. And this is like where a lot of like the enmity and stuff comes in, because you can do things, you instigate a challenge, and let's just say a creature wants to disengage. That's something they can do as a support action, where it's like they can, if they disengage, then they're allowed to, on their turn, basically do their movement turn freely without, being locked into a combat. You can do that, although you need to make influence skill checks, and then the enmity is also part of that. So that's extra like modifiers that are added on top. So it could be anywhere from a -3. So if you got really bad enmity, like it's going to be really difficult to be able to disengage from a challenging creature. If you have high enmity, it's going to be easy to disengage, or vice versa. If something's trying to disengage from you, if you have low enmity, chances are they're going to disengage. If you have high enmity, it's going to be a higher chance for them to stay in combat to be able to make those traps and that kind of stuff. So there's a lot that's involved, and I know it was like slightly confusing to the guys at the beginning, like, that's interesting. I'm used to being able to like make 2 attack, or like an attack here, go over to another person, make attack, which you still can, but again, the positioning is really important on how you do that.
And it makes a lot more sense. It's more like actual battle styles, right? You're not gonna like disengage from someone if someone's being violent towards you, you know, like in an actual battle. You're not gonna just like run away and go stab all the people, you know. You're gonna fight
Well, I know
one-on-one with people.
I know one way to mitigate this in D&D is you have like the disengage action, or if you choose to move, like creatures can use like what are they called? A reflex. Not ours is reflex support action, but a reaction to be able to like maybe make an attack if you're like attempting to get out of base contact. Like that's not a thing necessarily here, just because of the way that everything works. Like you're pretty much stuck into a combat. But you can also like attack all the creatures that you are in base contact with. So let's just say there's two different opponents when it comes to those melee combats. You have like the challenger, which are the attacker. So basically the attacker can choose to fight whoever they want. And then you have the defender who's defending. Let's say multiple creatures are challenging a defender. A defender can only attack the highest enmity creature that has challenged them. It doesn't matter how many creatures have challenged them. They can only attack the creature with the highest enmity. So again, something that benefits defenders of having really high enmity. If they have a mind score though of greater than the creature of the highest enmity, they can choose whoever they want. So basically, like they're really skillful in battlefield tactics, and they can be able to do whatever they want.
Well,
or if you have like a really stupid tank that's just like, oh, I'm coming, and it's just like you have like a really like intelligent creature that's like, I can't actually fight this guy head on, so I'm gonna attempt to attack another thing and blow all my attacks to try to take this thing down before like he can do any damage to me.
Exactly. Well, that's also why initiative is also incredibly important, because you can go and initiate that first, right? You can initiate that combat first, because otherwise you'd have to like break out of the combat in order to reinitiate with someone.
Well, and that's a reason why initiative is rolled every turn, unlike D&D where it's rolled once per turn or once per combat, because it would really suck if you were locked into a really low initiative priority for the entire time, because you might just be constantly overwhelmed by attacks and you can't do anything. And let's be honest, how fun is that? Where like in this case, like maybe you get a really low initiative and like things have charged you, things have done like initiate combat, and you withstood a lot of damage. You have a potential to be able the next round to be able to attempt to maybe flee the situation if you get a high enough initiative roll, or maybe even initiate your own combat so you can attack freely however you want. Another bad thing about being a defender too is you can't use melee combat arts. And so if you have melee combat arts and you are initiating combat, you can use them freely however you want. However, you can only make just regular melee weapon attacks if you've been initiated, if a combat has been initiated against you. So if you're the defender. And so your damage output potentially isn't quite as high if you're the defender than if you're the attacker. So there's strengths to being able to do that. Or if you are a defensive type of character and you want people to attack, let's say you don't have any actually melee attack arts, but a lot of your arts are based off of like how other creatures are like attacking you and that kind of stuff. Like you can strategically position yourself to be able to defend all kinds of attacks. Yes, maybe your damage output isn't quite as high, but you're doing your job of absorbing attacks from other creatures.
Yeah. Well, I mean, speaking of Zill, like he I think honestly is probably Zill was the reason why we survived that battle. Not only did he use that first ability to get everyone's attention, but because of our positioning and where we were, characters couldn't get to Zill. So basically they had to waste turns just sitting there because they couldn't challenge anyone else, because they all were had to go to Zill.
Some of those rules changed because yes, slightly broken. It kind of broke the combat a little bit, and it wasn't super fun for me as a Fate Weaver either. But essentially the way that changed is creatures are only going to go after. However, if a creature has been challenged, they can actually attack like during the attack phase against creatures that have challenged them. Gotcha. So it's not like they're not going to just like attack someone who's like already attacking them. Like they're going to do everything that they can to try to, and they won't initiate combat against anyone who is not Zill. But if someone does initiate combat against them during the attack phase, if they're not able to reach Zill, they can make attacks.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah,
makes more sense. Again, it's strategy and that kind of stuff, especially because that's not a super. I believe that's only like a level 5 art for him. I could be wrong, but I think that's only a level or a like level 3 actually art for him. So it's like a relatively low.
like
middle of
costs.
the road
Yeah,
art.
yeah,
So he can use it a decent amount of times
yeah.
before like it's completely gone.
Yeah, well, I mean,
So
I will say I think it did help us out a lot. Especially, I think it would have been a different story if we were wearing armor. But at least for my character Yuki, she had to wait 2 turns to like change into her armor, and she would have had attacks against her constantly. She had a couple against her, of course, but like it would have been a completely different story by the end of it. So
yeah.
I definitely
Well,
think
my goal that was part of my strategy was my goal was to go in there, and that's why I wasn't initially doing as many like arts attacks because the cultists do have like attack arts that they can use as well. But I wasn't doing. I was just trying to hit you with as many clubs as possible, essentially, because you guys had no armor value.
Yeah.
And I mean, you had some, but like I rolled a few natural ones, way too many. But just basically clubbing up against you to just try to deal as many damage. But again, like you said, Zill at the very beginning of the combat, basically for 2 whole rounds of combat, grabbed the attention of everyone, so really mitigated what I was able to do. And I could only go based off of what was written in Zill's arts rules. So
Exactly.
again, some of the balancing and stuff that's still happening before the release of the game.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
that's
no, I
great.
mean, I completely agree. Yeah.
Yeah, and so moving on to the next phase of combat, so those are the things that can happen in the movement phase. The next phase, which is the 3rd phase, is the attack phase. And so these are all the melee combat, and they basically go in the order that the priority initiative is. And so essentially what happens is you basically can spend attack actions. So each character has a set of support actions, each character has a set of attack actions that they can do in a given combat round. And so if you have any leftover attack actions, you may do so with a melee weapon against another creature that you've either challenged to in combat as the attacker, or a creature has challenged you and you're the defender. And so however that goes, you can do that. And so you basically just do melee attacks through the order, so just weapon attacks to hit, that kind of stuff. It's a very self-explanatory,
Simple.
and simple, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's much else to say about that phase.
Just attacking. Yep.
Attacks. And I guess the most that you have to think about is, do I do a weapon attack, specialist strike, or which special strikes are actually a new thing.
Yeah, that is a new thing. We can mention that a little bit, especially for Yuki as a character. So, I mean, what is a special strike, and like who can use them? Can everyone use them? Like, what are they?
Yeah, so a special strike is basically what it is. It's a special strike that you use with a weapon. So each weapon has different properties. So whether it's one-handed or two-handed, and then whether it's elemental. Those are the 3 things that are important. Any character can execute them as long as they're proficient with a weapon. For one-handed weapons that are not elemental, that don't have the elemental property, they have this thing called a piercing strike. And so what a piercing strike is you gain emboldened on your hit roll, and you gain emboldened on the damage of your weapon, which is basically just a +2 to the roll.
It's real good.
You have to utilize, in order to do a special strike, one of these special strikes, you have to use a reflex support action, which is an unused support action that, like, basically a reflex, what that means is like it's tack. You can use it at any time. It's in response to something. You tack it onto a weapon attack hit roll, and you can just do this. Additionally, it costs an additional point of stamina. So a one-handed attack is going to cost 1 stamina to do. So if you're going to do a piercing strike, not only does it cost a reflex support action, but it costs 2 points of stamina in order to do. Fortunately, the way that Yuki's character is built, so physical attackers, the physical DPS type of character, they get to ignore the stamina cost of any special strike.
It's quite nice.
Whether it's one-handed or two-handed. The next one is two-handed, so you have Mighty Strike. And the way that works is you have to call all these special strikes you have to call before you make your weapon attack. But as a reflex support action, if you land your two-handed weapon attack using the hit roll and all that kind of stuff for your weapon, you actually get to roll your damage with Hope, which is a reroll taking the higher value, which could potentially be really strong. And again, that uses an additional point of stamina. So your normal two-handed weapon attack is going to be 2 stamina, plus a reflex support action, additionally plus another point of stamina. Again, someone like Yuki, if she's using her broadsword two-handed and she chooses to do a Mighty Strike, she gets to ignore that extra point of stamina. Actually, that's what Belbin's doing, is he has a two-handed knuckles that he uses. If he uses a special strike, a Mighty Strike, he gets to ignore the stamina use of that second attack. So that's really good. And then you have, for ranged weapon, which is a connected to the two-handed property.
Mm-hmm.
For the ranged weapon, you get a basically a special shot or a mighty shot. Oh shoot, I can't remember what it's called. Oh no, that's gonna really bother me.
It's fine. I can talk about my character while you find
Yeah.
it. How's that sound?
Yeah.
But one thing that's really cool about that, again, it was just introduced into this, and I know Yuki utilized it a lot. I know at the beginning of the combat, she definitely forgot to use it a couple times,
Mhm.
but it actually did help her, especially because she still has a point of exhaustion on her, which affects her. I don't know if it necessarily does it affect attack itself.
It does.
Yeah, so it affects attack.
So that's a skill check technically.
Yeah, and so like she's getting a -2 to all of it. So using that special strike gives her just back to base, just normal attack, and then she also just gets 2 extra damage on top of it, which is really nice. So.
Yeah, so the next one is focused shot. So that's the third physical weapon special strike. And a focused shot, essentially what it is it's the opposite of a mighty strike, where you declare it beforehand, you use a reflex support action, and you get hope on the hit roll. And so the potential of hitting is a little bit higher. So basically just reroll, take the higher value. And then it's just normal damage through the roll. And then the next one are the elemental strikes. And so you have elemental strike, which is your melee. So certain, for example, the elven swords, so the Serdik, the Sertang, and the Cercian, same with the glaive, they have an elemental strike, which they could do as their special strike, which essentially as an attack action, it doesn't use a reflex support action, but as an attack action, their weapon attack damage becomes the damage type of whatever their elemental weapon is. For example, Belbin has a sword. It's a Sertang, which is like basically a hand and a half. So it could be one-handed or two-handed.
So that's what the Gladys is, right? The Gladys.
That's what the Gladys is,
yeah,
correct.
Yeah.
The properties of the Gladys haven't quite been as deciphered yet, but for Belbin's weapon, it's earth damage. So basically, the cutting damage from the weapon becomes earth damage. And essentially what it is it forces a creature to make a DC based on the rarity of the weapon. So is a common, so it's going to be just a base 10. They have to make a fortitude survival check, either if they get a 10 or lower, they receive full damage from the attack. If they get a less than that, then they receive half damage from whatever the ruled value is. Which the nice thing about an elemental strike is it changes the damage typing of your weapon, but it also, and it uses a charge of the weapon's elemental property, which is linked to the mana of a creature, but it also pretty much guarantees a hit. Super nice. Yeah, it's basically nice. Just like using arts against a creature for that. So, and again, if you're an elemental attacker, one thing that's really nice, or if you're just wielding an elemental weapon, is you can use it as many times as you have charges. It doesn't it just is part of an attack action. So you can use multiple in a turn. For example, Yuki only has one support action she can use in a turn. If she uses it during her movement phase, she can't special strike. However, if she saves it until her basically final into her attack round, she can use it once, which is really nice. And again, it provides a decent amount of benefits, especially with her dual wielding. As long as she hits with the first attack, pretty much, like she's pretty much guaranteed a follow-up attack with her offhand weapon. Yeah. So it's kind of nice that way.
Yeah, no, that's definitely really, really cool. And then the two-handed magical one, what does that do?
Oh, and then elemental shot. So these ones necessarily aren't tied to one-handed or two-handed.
Okay.
But it's basically melee and ranged. And ranged is basically you get a base range of 80 feet with it. Okay. So for example, Luxali's staff has that. She has basically an ash fire staff. And the flame staff, instead of bonking someone with it, she can shoot a creature up to 80 feet and basically force them to make a DC 10 fortitude survival check. On a failure, takes 2d6 flame damage, or on a success, half of that. So really nice. Being able to just like not only change the damage type, but for the elemental shot, give her a ranged attack option.
Oh, for sure. And it's super, super nice. I mean, she utilized it definitely. I actually think she took out what's her name? Sinzirak with it. Did she? Maybe. I can't remember.
I don't remember. I think Zil might have, but
spoiler alert, we killed her, which is good. So
yeah, pretty much.
No, if you're listening to this, you probably already watched it. If not, go back and watch it.
We gave you plenty of warning, just FYI. But then the final round or final phase of combat is the bottom of the round phase, which a number of things happen during that. So some things didn't apply. Some things did apply. But the first thing that any creature does is they do positioning rolls. And so if there is a creature that has been in a combat challenge, basically every creature involved in that combat challenge make a physical skill check. And the creature, basically the side with the highest value. So like, for example, you have 3 creatures against one. It's basically 3 dice against 1 dice. But the side with the highest roll essentially wins that positioning roll, and every other creature must move back 5 feet in like a direction to basically reset. If that's unable to happen, if they're unable to do so and make a move, they're considered trapped, which essentially what happens is any creatures that are trapped, any attackers that are engaged in that combat, or just in general, people who are engaged in that combat, get a free weapon attack against them. So it benefits to be able to have a trap on a creature.
Does that use stamina, that extra weapon attack?
The extra weapon attack, I believe, uses stamina, but not for physical attackers. I have to double check that, but I don't think physical attackers actually utilize stamina on that. So,
well, good thing Yuki has a really high physical stat, so that's gonna be really nice for her.
Yep.
I think Belbin has a decently high one too, actually.
Well, I mean, both of them are physical attackers, so yeah, as long as they're winning those combat challenges or the positioning rolls, they can do that. And essentially, the purpose of that is it resets everything. So, like at the top of the next turn priority initiative, it gives the winning side more options to be able to maneuver instead of just continuously just being clumped up against like a bunch of other creatures. And again, this is kind of an element that exists in like war games, where there's always like a little bit of movement, and mostly just to identify like who's in battle and who's not. But in this case, it allows the players to be able to maneuver. If they wish not to attack, they can attempt to retreat to hide. They can try to get the high ground, whatever the case. If they end up winning that, like it gives them a little bit more of a maneuvering advantage. So that's nice. But then another thing that you do at the bottom of the round is the next thing is all of the survival rolls, which essentially a survival roll is someone who is unconscious with 0 hit points. The way that a creature dies in Everlast is if they gain points of bleeding, that's what they're called, equal to their maximum, basically equal to their maximum fortitude modifier. And so like that could be a maximum of 8, essentially, the way that works. And so when you fall unconscious, you're at half of your points. And what ends up happening is you start with a DC of 1. So like you can pretty much guarantee your first one unless you've been attacked. If you've been attacked by a melee attack during that time, so if someone makes a melee attack against you, it automatically hits. Your unconscious automatically hits. It increases that by 2. If you get hit by a melee or a ranged attack, it increases it by 1. And so turn after turn, the more attacks that you incur, the higher that the DC of that check is going to be. If you succeed in it, you end up losing 1 point of bleeding, essentially, 1 stack of bleeding. And then if you critically succeed, you minus 2 stacks. On the flip side, if you fail it, you gain 1 stack of bleeding. If you critically fail, you gain 2 stacks of bleeding. So if you have a really low fortitude score and have like a fortitude modifier of 4, let's just say, you drop to 2 when you fall unconscious. If you critically fail, you die. So there's definitely some like, urgency to be able to get players up for that. And so like, again, it kind of gives you some, something to think about when you're doing your stat spreads.
Well, also because it's unlike D&D, you can't heal a character alive, basically.
Correct. So like, if a creature is unconscious, you can't just use a healing item or attempt to use a healing art on them. Until they are conscious, those will not work on them. And so you basically have to get them up before you're able to do any healing. And so essentially what happens is when you hit 0 points with 0 stacks of bleeding, you become conscious with 1 hit point, and thus healing can happen. It's actually one nice thing about an art that Thordane has is he has actually a really low heal, which I think just right off the base, it's like 1d4.
It's 1d4. Yeah.
It's not very good. However, he can use it to get unconscious allies up. And so like he can actually heal a creature. So like he's a short heal where it looks all he definitely has like burst healing. Yeah. Like a lot of really good healing, but her healing doesn't affect like unconscious creatures. Where Thordane, it's probably not super worth it to like try to do 1d4 plus wisdom modifier heal on somebody. But if someone's unconscious, like he can run to their aid and get them up. So there's like, again, some of these support classes are built differently on how they're supposed to work. So definitely Thordane's like emergency. Oh no, yes, we want to continue playing. Yes, nice. And so emergency. And then essentially, Luxalia's like her goal is just keep everyone healthy.
And it definitely helps quite a bit, I will say.
Another element of this bottom of the round combat too. I know we're spending a lot of time on this, but this is really like new kind of key thing. Is this hasn't happened yet, but it's called a resilience check. And so you'll notice the fortitude score is broken into defense and resilience. And so the defense basically goes into like medium and heavy armor, DV, and then your res, it goes into this end of the round check. Again, it depends, I guess, how you play Dungeons and Dragons, but status ailments could be very prevalent or not so much. In Everlast, status ailments are very prevalent. So lots of attacks, lots of effects, lots of support arts. Players are going to be afflicted with status ailments a lot. And so essentially the way that they work in order to get rid of a status ailment is you're afflicted with a status ailment, and then at the bottom of each combat round, you basically roll a resilience check, and if you get over a certain value, the effect goes away. And so as opposed to like re-rolling it every time on your turn, it's just always at the bottom of each round. And because of that, status ailments don't have a certain period of time that they last. Basically, until the status ailment goes away, it's going to last. And so, yeah, that's just kind of how that works, whether it's frightened, charmed, stunned, whatever the case. These status ailments don't go away until that. So you might be like, I got to just put a bunch of points into my defense value, so my DV goes out the roof. It's like, great. But you might be really crippled on a status ailment if you're just rolling a flat D16. Your chances of, passing those resilience rolls are not as good. Again, it's kind of a balance.
I actually think the party is a pretty even split, because initially what the RV went into was there was elemental damage and there was physical damage. So I think the party did a decent job of splitting up that stat block a little bit, because again, if you're getting attacked by elemental damage, you want to have an high RV, but that's different now. That's completely different. Every attacking action is just against your normal DV, and then against your defense value, and then status ailments and stuff, which makes a lot of sense. So
yeah, I agree. And so that's another roll that you can make. I might be space it on other rolls, and then just like again end of turn calculations, making sure you're keeping track of things like durability of your weapons, durability of your armor, the amount of times you've hit things, so you can calculate proficiency, experience, and that kind of stuff. Just like per turn, it's just housekeeping stuff at the bottom of the round to just do. And then the last thing is focus. And so, like, for example, I think Yuki has to make these with a lot of her skills. Is there's certain arts that allow you that last for multiple turns, but at the bottom of each combat round, you have to roll focus. And essentially what that is it's a base DV plus an additional, like, 1 for every 10 points of damage that you've received in the round of combat. And so
yeah, she failed her first one. It could be
low. Yeah, so it could be low, or it could be really high, depending on how much damage that you received. So that's another thing to think about too. So yeah, and that completes combat, and then what it does is it just bumps right into the top of the round of combat again.
Yeah, so. It seems like a lot, but honestly, when you're actually in combat and you're doing it, it actually makes it a lot easier to split it up by like that. Again, it makes it more realistic too. I feel like it makes sense.
There's a lot more like fun strategy that you can do.
And it just makes a lot more sense too. It's not just like, okay, run up to someone and whack them and bonk them. It's a lot more than that now because of it. Actually reminds me kind of a lot like Fire Emblem, right? I've been currently playing Fire Emblem Three Houses on just the normal streaming that I do at Fantasy Forge Studios, and actually a lot of it reminds me of it in like JRPGs, that kind of stuff. Kyle, we're actually running a little bit low on time for today's stream. So actually, as far as like the dungeoning phase, I know you wanted to get to talking about that and maybe a little bit of the roleplay stuff. Just because we're still in the dungeon, I think that is something that we can talk about maybe in the month of August.
Sounds good.
But I guess the last thing we will, before we get into questions, the last thing we'll talk about is playing with missing players, and we can just mention a little bit about this kind of thing. But I know recently we've been missing lots of players. Like again, Thordane's been gone, and he's gone for the foreseeable future. Hopefully he's doing well, doing the things that he's doing. John, the character, plays Thordane, so I'll be controlling his character from here on out. And I know like Cole, for example, during the combat, he got into the combat and then he had to leave halfway through. Actually, right at the beginning he had to leave, and then Connor wasn't there for the combat either. So how have you dealt with that, because that battle, you were not only
tough.
doing like 10 troops of dudes. I think it was like 7 troops of dudes, including some bandits and the bad girl and the bad lady, but you were also controlling Salic, who is the NPC who's on our time, as well as Thordane and Belbin, and I took over Luxalia, but you were doing Luxalia as well. So, oh my gosh, how did you do it?
So, I don't recommend going back and re-listening to session 6 and like doing all the math down to a T, because I was fly by the seat of my pants. I ain't gonna lie. There were like lots of things, so like it might be questionable how much HP things had left. I mean, I was doing a pretty good tracking, like how much stamina people had, all that kind of stuff, like the amount of arts that they were using and tracking all that. But especially with like Belbin, I was using him minimally, like just attacks. I was using Thordane minimally, just like attacks. And like just I wasn't keeping track of their things like stamina and that kind of stuff. I was just like, all right, it sounds like that he's done a lot of attacks. He's probably running low on stamina now. There was like a lot that was going on, and I realized actually at the very end, it was a fun encounter, but I realized at the very end, I'm just like, dang, not only was I not prepared for the combat just in general to go down, and so I really quickly, like if you saw my note sheet, oh my gosh, just like flying through and like marking things down. But like being able to control 2 characters was really tough. And so one thing that I actually ended up doing was for session 7, I went through some emails to the guys. I'm like, all right, so this was really tough for me. If this ever happens again, and I know, like, for example, certain people are going to be missing, like, every now and then, that's completely understandable. I get it. This person's in charge of covering this character when they're gone. This person's in charge of covering this person when they're gone. And so we split it down to, like, I believe Dane, you're always here basically.
Yeah. So Belbin and Thordane are the 2 characters that I control. So, for example, since John's gonna be gone for the foreseeable future, session 7, I was basically playing Thordane, which was kind of cool. You know, I'm trying to play it as best as I can, but of course, as far as some role play stuff goes, you have priority, because I don't want to role play a character that
no, I mean
it's
totally fine, and it's fun because it's also, as a DM, not super fun to just like role play with yourself.
Yeah.
Like if I'm just like talking like I'm an enemy, but I'm talking to Thordane, I'm like, oh hey, and then Thordane's like, oh, I'm gonna say this.
Obviously, this is something that we had to develop over the 2 years that we've been doing it. Like I've known Thordane and John and his character for over 2 years, so I think I have a general good idea about how to do it. Maybe it'd be a different story if it was a brand new party, you know. But yeah.
So there's that, but I believe if Dane's missing, Connor covers his character. So Connor controls Belbin and Yuki, just because they're physical DPS and they're kind of similar-ish. If Cole's missing, Max covers him, and then if Max is missing, Cole covers him. So,
luckily, at least Max and I are usually there. We're definitely the most consistent of everyone. So at least so far it's been the case, yeah. So... Yeah,
so it's good. So that kind of covers everyone's bases. But yeah, so that's one thing. How do I play with missing people? I do, and it's really hard. And sometimes, as a Fate Weaver, as a Dungeon Master, you have to have a little mercy on yourself, and you have to, you know, have some humility and being like, sometimes you're just not prepared for what happens, and you just gotta do what you can. The nice thing about being a Fate Weaver is you can track whatever you want, and nobody knows. It's not necessarily
leave the
cheating.
fate.
Yeah, it's not like I'm like purposely being like, oh, this guy like has like way less HP than this guy, or this guy has way more HP. It's like, you know, when you're thrown into a situation like that, you can only do so much, like as far as like the tracking goes, especially because I wasn't prepared for that encounter to begin with, which in retrospect I should have been, considering the situation that I was put in, or that like the party was put in, I was going to put the party in. So again, that's things that you learn, you live and you learn as a Fate Weaver. But yeah, it becomes very difficult when multiple people are missing. And I know like some like Dungeon Masters, Fate Weavers, whatnot, like are, you know, be like, we'll just cancel a session. But not only is it like great to like get to like hang out with these guys, we only play twice a month.
Yeah.
And so like not only is it great to play with these guys, but you know, like for you guys as a content too, like we want to be able to share this with you. It's not just our adventure, but it's a adventure that we can all participate in together. It's wonderful, and it's great content that we want to be as consistent as possible. Not only just for the pacing of the story, but you know, it becomes somewhat of a priority in people's lives. And we understand, again, it is a game. And so for the players, like our players have real lives. And
I don't know if you heard during session 7, Connor's little little child came into the it was so cute. It was so cute. But yeah, a lot of these, actually all of us, except for me, I guess, and Max, like are married, and Connor has kids, and like everyone has their own life with their own jobs, and like people are busy, so we totally understand.
Yeah, so it's one of those things, and so missing players is just, it comes to the territory if you're wanting to be a Fate Weaver, if you're wanting to Dungeon Master for any kind of roleplay game. And here's the thing, like, it's totally fine. And one of the things that's really great about having other players cover each other's characters as opposed to the Fate Weaver is like other players get to know the characters. And so, like, for example, like eventually when John does come back and plays Thordane, Dane can actually give him tips on how to play Thordane. It's not going to be like he's just like, oh shoot, like I don't remember how to play him or whatnot. Or like Dane might find a different way to play Thordane that's really effective, that he might be able to share some tips and tricks with John about like, here's a really effective way to play him. You might have been playing him this way, but maybe he works better this way.
Yuki will just be like, oh man, I remember that time where you used this one skill. That was really cool. Can you do that again, Thordane? And then John will be like, wait, can I? Oh yeah, I guess I can.
So it just, and you know, it kind of makes it fun, and it makes, I feel like, the other players like grow a connection, like, you know, just by virtue of that. It's like you don't want another ally to like maybe die or whatnot. It kind of, you know, I think it emboldens the bonds, bolsters the bonds, bolsters the bonds that each of the players have with each other.
I agree. Well, I mean, we got a lot into the nitty gritty of it, so we didn't get to quite everything we wanted to, but it's okay. I actually think the stuff that we have left to discuss for the next podcast is very doable to do with what we have. Yeah, dungeoning, that kind of stuff. But let's get into some questions. So we have one big question that we have, and then we have some announcements, some things to talk about. So the one question that we do have for today is, what are some elements of the game inspired from JRPGs and Tolkien? So I know on my normal daily streams that I do here at Fantasy Forge Studios, I always promote Everlast, and how I promote it is like it's a wonderful mixture between tabletop RPG like Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder, but it also has a lot of elements of like JRPGs and Tolkien-esque ones as well. And I know a lot of people have had questions about that, like how is that? Like how does it actually differ?
Where I think with specifically JRPG and Tolkien is, I think a lot of like lore, a lot of the way that the world works and that kind of stuff is very influenced by Tolkien, for sure. Yeah. I grew up loving those books. That was our childhood. Actually, I was talking to my wife about it this past week, and I remember as a kid, like when I was like 5 years old, it was like Dane and I, we enjoyed lots of things. We enjoyed dinosaurs. We enjoyed, like construction, well, not construction, but like race cars, like little like Hot Wheels, all kinds of stuff. But it was when we were 5 years old that our cousin, he introduced us to Lord of the Rings. And actually, it was like Lord of the Rings, the books, but also the, at the time, Lord of the Rings strategy battle game, which we really got into. We didn't really learn the rules of it, but like literally since then, like fantasy in the world of Tolkien took over all of our interests. Not to say we weren't well-rounded in our interests, but like our main thing was fantasy. Like we were super into fantasy.
It brought us into, I mean, we'll talk about this a little bit later, I guess, like later on in the answer, but JRPGs are so influenced by Western fantasy and Tolkien as well, as far as like how they appear on the surface kind of thing. So I think that also brought us to like the liking of like Final Fantasy and things like that, not just Lord of the Rings, you know?
Well, and also too, one of the things that I think makes these books so beloved, the Lord of the Rings books specifically, Hobbit, all of Tolkien's works essentially, is the fact that they're directed towards people of all ages. And I did a lot of study and that kind of stuff at university. Again, I was a youth minister for 4 years of my life. I studied to be that when I was at college. And the theology that's in it, like, again, essentially this game is a Christian game. And the amount of theology, Catholic theology, that is within Tolkien's works, and it's evident. Like, the one thing that I love about it is it's not super in your face, which I really love and appreciate. Maybe in Everlast it's a little bit more in your face, but I really love in Tolkien's world that it's not super duper in your face. But like you get all of those things like like fellowship, brotherly bonds. Like you actually have people that have actual real life emotion. There is deities in the world, like a monotheistic deity. There's good, there's versus evil. It's like all these things that stem from Christianity, and the more you study, the more you can really integrate that into this world that not only is just a fantasy world, but it's a world that like I know, and it's a world that I love. And I want to be able to create Everlast to be something like that, where it's not just like a shallow, just like base level world, but it's a world that actually has theological values and things built into it to make it relatable, to make it, actually like important to the rest of the world. So a lot of like the narrative elements, I would say, a lot of the story lore, very influenced by Tolkien-esque type stuff, and maybe you'll see hints of that later on, or even now, whatever you see. But as far as like the mechanics and stuff, very heavily influenced by JRPGs, particularly the patronage system and like the all that kind of stuff. So it's like you have like how it splits up into like like the paths, where you have the special attack, or you have the physical attackers, elemental attackers, defenders, element or support characters, kind of like their traditional like party. I think of like Final Fantasy 14, where you have like 2 DPS, tank, and a healer. You go into a dungeon doing that kind of stuff, where it's like it provides lots of opportunities for really good cohesion, like party group teamwork, which I really love, and I really appreciate that. And you can have that with D&D for sure, but I feel like a lot of characters tend to be made to like stand like on their own 2 feet. Where it's just like you have like a bunch of individuals that get placed into a party that like maybe do a lot of similar things, or like some like vastly different things, or whatever the case. But I feel like the way that the Everlast party is supposed to be is everyone's supposed to be well-rounded. They're supposed to support each other in whatever way. They're supposed to complement each other, so you build parties around that. And in the character creation process, that's things you talk about as players and as a party. Is like, I want to take up this role for the party, I want to do these types of things, and and it gives enough freedom too, like Dane had mentioned. Everyone has arts, unlike D&D, where it's like there's some classes that don't have access to magic. It's like everybody has those elements, so no matter what path you play, it doesn't matter. Like you're gonna have access to those elements, but like you're gonna have slightly different things that you can do to be able to help your party.
Exactly. And I know one thing that we talked about earlier was the special strikes as well. I see that a lot, like JRPGs and whatnot. Like not only like you implement this onto your attack to be able to do more damage kind of thing, which is really cool, and something that definitely seems very JRPG as well to me, which is really cool.
Absolutely.
No, there's a lot of different aspects and stuff, and I'm sure we'll come to see them more and more as the campaign continues.
For sure.
Yeah. All right, well, I think that's a great answer. So I guess we have a couple housekeeping things really quick before we get going. But one of the biggest announcements that we have, at least for the coming year, we have some new faces joining us at Fantasy Forge Studios as far as like our normal actual weekly streams go. So those of you who have been here for a while know I'm the main streaming personality, Forged, or Dane, some call me, but I usually go by Forged here. And I unfortunately stream in the middle of the night when it comes to American time. Again, I live in Japan just like Kyle does, and I work a full-time day job. And so the times that I stream is like between midnight and 5 a.m. American time, just spread throughout the entire States. And
literally just right in the middle of the night.
Right in the middle of the night. And I feel like we're missing out on so much of an audience. And I know we've had a lot of interest for watching our content. It's just that it's such a bad time. So actually, Cole and Max, so Luxalia's, I guess, real person who's behind Luxalia, and Zill will be joining us here at Fantasy Forge Studios, and they'll be streaming during normal American time, actual time at the Fantasy Forge Studios Twitch channel. So it's still gonna be Fantasy Forge. It's not gonna be a brand new Twitch channel. So if you're subscribed, if you're following, you don't have to do anything to keep with that. You're already subscribed. You're already following them, kind of thing. But it's extra content, more content for us to be able to consume. So not only do we have my normal streams, we also have Everlast, and then we'll eventually have Max and Cole. So we haven't determined a starting date for them yet. They're still getting started as far as that kind of thing goes, but they're joining, which is really, really cool. So for my American friends, my North American friends, South American friends, people who live on that side of the world who unfortunately can't make our streams, you have some content to be able to consume, which is going to be really cool. Again, expanding our studio.
It's honestly one thing that's like really fun and really amazing, and I think you'll really enjoy both Max and Cole. They are goobers. Oh my gosh, just they're super nerdy. I think they'll fit in with this great community. They're a lot of fun. Like for example, Cole is an actor, so like his job is like entertaining people. So like he's an actor, he can do that. Max is just as great. Like Max is going into the priesthood, and one of the things that you have to do is you actually have to be like somewhat charismatic in order to be a good priest. Go figure. But yeah, he was going to do that. He did discern out, but one of the things that bringing with him is his personality. Like he's awesome. And those of you who've been watching Everlast, you definitely see glimpses of like their personalities, and they're really great and they're really fun. And the two of them are also best friends. And so like being able to like see just how they interact with each other while they play games, like it's going to be very entertaining to watch.
And they'll be playing a wide variety of games. They'll be doing a lot of co-op, which is something I don't normally do. I usually play single player games. So if you like co-op and like banter back and forth, definitely that's something to be watching. And I know Cole was also thinking about just streaming by himself and just doing some just intimate in-person streams like I do every single day during the week. So that's also something that you'll be able to consume, and it'll be really, really fun. And I know they're really excited. I know Max has been bugging me and wanting me to push the fact that Zill, he actually has a pet mouse. And I know he's going to be constantly reminding you guys to help him name his pet mouse. So please, in the comments, either in this video or in any of the videos, please help Zill name his pet mouse. Give your suggestions, give your names, and who knows, maybe the winner will get some exclusive Everlast merch or something. I don't know. We'll see what it comes down to, but give him a name. He's been wanting a name, is what it is. So
yes, and the dungeon scout, as Belbin wants him to be.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so that's the biggest news. That's the biggest excitement. Some other things to go into. There are some ways to be able to support Everlast. Of course, your kindness and just being here and being able to interact with Everlast with us and be able to join us on this adventure is more than enough. If you have the means to be able to, feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any of our uploads or anything. And also share our content. Comment, share, give it a like, hit that bell to make sure that notifications are going. It's the best way to be able to not miss any of our content, but also spread this community. Kyle and I are producing this game ourselves. We're not going through any big publishers or anything. But word of mouth is really, really important for us to be able to get the name of Everlast out there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and there's a couple other ways for those of you who are fortunate enough to be able to potentially help us financially. Again, we're producing it ourselves, so financial help is also needed, and there's a couple ways to be able to do that. Of course, you can always just like donate if you want to. Obviously, that's not expected at all. None of the financial options are expected, but there's a couple options that you can get some pretty cool stuff too. One of them is we actually have a merch store, and again, that's going to be linked in the comment section down below. But the merch store has exclusive Fantasy Forge merch, but it also has exclusive Everlast merch, including some really cool Japanese streetwear designs, including a really nice hoodie that I recently designed, as well as a bunch of t-shirts, a bunch of like cool things that you can use in your daily lives that are Everlast themed and character themed, so you can support your favorite character, and all of the proceeds go towards the creation of Everlast 2. So you're killing two birds with one stone. You're not only getting some sweet merch, but you're also getting some amazing or you're supporting the game, the creation of the game, which is really, really cool. Also, the Fantasy Forge merch as well will be going towards the creation of Everlast.
And it's super cool and really unique. Like Dane did a really good job.
We got
with
basic
that. So,
Fantasy Forge stuff. Like
the basic logo, which the logo is beautiful. Yeah. There's like things like Zelda. I know Dane plays a lot of Zelda on his channel. There's like Zelda stuff. There's what was it?
Some Hollow Knight. There's some Bloodborne. There's Octopath Traveler for my JRPG friends out there. And we'll continuously add more like designs to the merch store, so feel free to do that. Last thing about the merch store, we actually have a up to 20% off sale going on through the end of July. So if you've been thinking about getting some merch, this is the cheapest time that you're going to be able to get some. In August, we're going to be bumping the prices back up to what they normally are. So the merch store is already reduced by up to 20% for each item. So feel free to go check that out. At the very least, just to look at the cool designs, but it's a good way to be able to support Everlast. And the second way to be able to do that is the Patreon, which Kyle, I'll let you talk about that a little bit.
Absolutely. So the Patreon is, there's 2 levels on it. Essentially what it is you subscribe. If you subscribe at the $5 level, which is a monthly subscription, each month that we stream Everlast, you get access to be able to act on behalf of Fate towards the players by granting them hope. Essentially what happens is during the normal streams of Eklos Eos, there's going to be certain situations where maybe there's a super important role, and whether their identity is going to be revealed, whether there's a really important attack that needs to land, whether there's a diplomacy that, like, depending on the result, like something really good or bad could happen, or in the case of what's already happened at one point, the role of a really good gear. Basically, essentially what you do is you could throw hope, which, as mentioned earlier, it's a reroll. You take the higher of the rolls. So it's not always going to be beneficial, but you get that once a month to use on one of the 2 streams. If you subscribe at the $10 level, you will unlock 2 uses of that hope per month. Additionally, you get access to all of the audio files, all of the audio, their audio, of Eklos Eos, the Adventures of Eklos Eos, before the official stream. And that's hours upon hours upon hours of content. Some of them are lost to the ether, some of the sessions, but we'll let you know when that happens. But yeah, these, lots of fun. Again, it's 2 years of gameplay. It's 2 years of getting to know Eklos Eos before the actual stream content. And some of these sessions last anywhere from 3 hours to 6 hours. And so if you really love to consume what Everlast has, what the Adventures of Eklos Eos is, like this, like triples your content
easily,
like per month.
Yeah.
And so you have all that to be able to have. And again, all of that stuff is back when we were having Everlast as our D&D campaign. So it's not going to be all the updated rules and that kind of stuff. There's going to be like a few changes of those kind of things, but the story's the same. You're there for the story, right? And so you get to follow the characters. You can see Baby, all of us 2 years earlier.
Yeah.
Level
1 Yuki. Oh, poor girl. Look at her.
Level 1 DM.
Shanking things with glass shards and, doing all the do.
Lots of fun. Lots of fun. So you can do that if you subscribe at the $10 level on Patreon.
Yep, and I guess without further ado, the schedule ahead. So August is going to be a little bit of a weird month. There's a lot of traveling that people are doing, including myself. I'm going to be visiting Kyle in Tokyo and stuff, him and his wife, and so we're going to be doing that actually the 3rd weekend of August, meaning the weekend, I believe it's the 20th, is that Saturday? We will not actually be having a stream, so we'll only have one Everlast stream, which will be the weekend of the 13th. So we're going to be doing that. However, we are having an extra stream this month. July is a weird month where it has 5 weekends in it. So we're going to be having the first, I guess, technically August session the last weekend of July, which is, I guess, not July this weekend, 30th. Next weekend, July 30th. So join us for that. That's going to be really cool. So lots of Everlast in the month of July, which is cool. But yeah, join us for that one. And then the next session, we're going to have a week off. And then we'll be getting into the next session. So session 8 will be the 30th of July. And then the session 9, oh my gosh, session 9, can't believe it's crazy, will be the 13th of August, which is a Saturday. So join us for that, guys. Any other last minute announcements, anything like that, Kyle, that you can think of?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Honestly, just pray for the channel, pray for this game and the whole process going forward. It's coming along really good. Like every day that goes by is more and more encouraging. The more support that you can give us, especially through prayers, especially through viewing the Fantasy Forge content and whatnot, it means the world to us. You guys mean the world to us. And the goal is to be able to allow you guys to experience your own adventures in Everlast. And so the more that you engage with this, the more that it emboldens us to be able to get it out not only quicker, but give you something of amazing quality to be able to play.
And the more you'll get out of it too. I will say it is like, of course, during the stream, there's only so much interaction you can have with us, but we are more than happy to talk about it whenever, wherever, whether it's in the comment section on YouTube, whether it's
join the Discord.
Yeah, or whether it's in the Discord as well. We talk a lot about not just Everlast, but all kinds of games. We're a community, ultimately, is what it is. And we all have each other's backs. We're not just like, oh, these godly streamers up there. No. We're all the same, and we all just want to make it a wonderful community where we can all
very
hang
real
out.
people.
Yes.
I'm gonna tell you, I'm reminded of that whenever I stub my toe on my bed. Very real.
Very real. Despite you having those Fate Weaver powers, very real still mortal.
Fate weaves itself towards me too, in the form of bloody toes.
Oh no, oh, that's so rough. We all have those times. But yeah, if you guys haven't considered, feel free, like I said, giving us a subscribe on YouTube and liking the videos. And if you have a Twitch account, feel free to do so as well. One thing that's really cool about Twitch too, especially if you're not like big into Twitch and you don't have anyone you follow, say you're just on Twitch to be able to watch our content live. One thing that's really cool is if you have an Amazon Prime account, one way to be able to financially support us for free is if you have an Amazon Prime account, you can feel free to give us a free subscription on Twitch. So by having Amazon Prime, you're able to utilize that for one Twitch channel every month, and basically it gives you the emotes that you can use on the channel, as well as it gives us a small little
and guys, Dane has sick emotes. For
yeah,
those of
really
you who aren't subscribed already, they're really good.
The artist did an amazing job on them, and we still have more coming out, and we have specific Everlast ones, we have lots of Zelda ones. It's really cool. So if you want some cool emotes to be able to use in the streams and in the chat, and you have Amazon Prime and you're not using it on another Twitch channel, consider using it towards this, because again, it's going towards the creation of Everlast. So it's a free way to be able to help financially support us, if that makes sense. So I always forget that that's a thing, that like there's the Twitch Prime membership. And if you have any more questions about that, feel free to ask in the comments or ask in the Discord too, and we can help you with that. But feel free to do so. Otherwise it's just going to waste, burning a hole in your pocket. So if you have it, feel free to use it. But anyways, I think that's where we're gonna end it for today, guys. Thank you all for stopping by. Again, session 4. All right, I guess podcast number 4, covering sessions. I guess really only session 6 at this point, but we'll get into all of session 7, 8, and 9 in the month of August. So thank you all for joining us. Lots of love. Any last words, Kyle?
God bless you all.
Yeah. May Alomnia guide you. Bye, everyone.